So today, I did this video roughly 5 years ago, but OBS has a real knack for fucking me in the meanest ways possible. It was roughly 6 hours. I went through a book, and it was actually very well put together documentation on the insights of transgender, and it laid out a lot of good framework. I'll see if I can find something for you guys to all read. If not, you have Google, you have DuckDuckGo, you have innumerable vectors in which you can learn something, so I would recommend strongly that you do. And the reason we're bringing this up on this channel is because of the IOC. So the IOC, which is, if we go over to it, an organization for the International Olympic Committee. Who cares about the Olympics? Not me personally. Honestly, I don't pay much stock into it. There's not really much that excites me about it. But I follow a vegan athlete who is very, very largely speaking up for animals. Monica, I will tag Monica in the description. You can follow her. Very good head on her shoulders. Olympic bronze medalist. Absolutely fantastic to see somebody with such a reach speaking up for people and animals, which is my primary concern. But she shared this. And when I talked about it in 2001, the whole conversation about banning transgender individuals from sports was basically in favor of it, because people had a lot of very surface level takes for it. So what I'm going to do is break this down into sections. I'm going to outline things that we know, and then we're going to continue further down the line to see why this is so highly deleterious and genuinely kind of baffling to me that they would put something like this out, especially considering this is an international organization. And to me, doing this just seems like a massive potential failing in acknowledging that people are not so open-minded, and also that this could directly destroy the sport itself. So why would I make such an odd claim? Clearly, we have a division of genders in sport for a reason, right? You're very correct. Androgen dominance is by far the largest proponent of neuromuscular connection, the ability for one to produce substantial amounts of output, and by far it is one of the largest drivers in athletic performance. When all else is held constant between two individuals in their work capacity, somebody with a higher level of androgens can facilitate substantially more work and progress and reap higher consistent yields on what they are doing as a result. Now, that's not to say that if only everybody is doing 100 at 100, that the individuals with the higher index of androgens and its availability will substantially outperform them. It's also that the aggregate bonuses from that, the enhanced recovery time, the potential to train more effectively and efficiently, and to advance further beyond that and to push boundaries considerably quicker and with a higher cap, is going to be made readily apparent through consistent bouts of training. Although it is still to be said that if all else was held constant, the outcome for the higher androgen loaded individual would still be significantly, or at least statistically significantly, more impactful. Now, that's also just to say that those are being held equivalent if we are to train in such a regard to aim for the highest optimal output and to push much further beyond that. The risk for injury, you could make an argument that by overreaching you increase your risk for injury. You could make the argument that there is a lot to be unpacked within that, and with overreaching and finding that potential cap, and by training too hard too fast you do increase risk to reward Scenarios that are less favorable. Thank you, Malwarebytes. You're going to pop up like 2 more times, aren't you? That's great. I fucking love the fact that this is on my computer. Anyway, that little bit aside, it's not to be put out in some vague saying of, oh, well, yeah, if you do that, you actually have a higher risk factor. The likelihood that you can overreach and overtrain and accomplish more with better recovery time as a result of it it's non-arguable, and that's where the contention there within is with the addition of transgender individuals. Now, why is that? It's due to a few different things. I'll break this down in very binary terms, and it's solely because of the categorization of sexing. This is not a conversation of gender. This is a conversation of the declination of sexes, whether it be the intersex category, the male category, and the female category. I do have to use kind of old-timey verbiage to get delineations made readily apparent for some people who are less informed about the variances there in between. So let me just use some really let me use some antiquated language just to make it easier for everybody, in case there are people who are genuinely a bit confused by everything, right? So typically when we go back to like the 1960s and we think of a male, we think of a person who's got a penis and balls, right? Like a penis and testicles. When you think of a woman back then, it would be a vagina, ovaries, uterus, etc. Yeah, the maturation period for men would be facial hair in excess, body hair in excess, muscular development in excess, as well as the ability to produce semen. And for women, during the phases of maturation, it would be the development of breast tissue, different distribution of fat, widening of hips, and then the menses, or the menstrual cycle, starting. Now, there is another category that has been just kind of glossed over, unless you're watching an episode of House or some MD TV show where intersex reality is brought up. So by intersex, we have a lot of variation behind it, but essentially you can have somebody that, let's say, they look like how you would imagine that girl to be, but they also, through a myriad of ways in which the body has developed, could also have either a penis or testes, maybe both, or it could be pseudo-testes, where there is formation and they haven't fully descended, and they can cause a large series of complications, like an internal testicular torsion, which could then cause severe complications and potentially death, sepsis, a lot of things wrong with it. But essentially, when it comes to intersex, it could be that somebody that is passing for a woman may in fact also have male genitalia internally, and it's not readily apparent to anybody. And this is the first problem with this sort of genetic testing. Now, if we are able to delineate, which they say that they are, so if you go through here, in intersex athletes, unless they undergo further testing to prove testosterone insensitivity. So, they will ban all transgender athletes from the women's category and intersex athletes unless they undergo further testing to prove testosterone sensitivity. So this is the first thing that I would imagine draws the largest amount of contention, and it's because a lot of countries do not have basic human rights in any appreciable manner. And in fact, for anybody that is intersex or transgender, you're likely looking at a death sentence, either via social lampooning, social outcry, and through the large and unwavering prejudice propagated by the culture, or additionally, you could find that by this information being revealed, your entire career as an athlete is tanked. So if we look at somebody who is fully in line with the idea that their gender identity aligns with their sex assigned at birth and they are female, and they dominate the sporting events that they're at. They work their entire young adult life into entering into the Olympics. And let's say that they're in a country like Mauritania or somewhere where there's less than favorable transgender, LGBTQ, or otherwise just flagrantly homophobic and non-existent human rights. And I will say that very confidently because they were one of the very last countries to ban slavery, to make it illegal. And after its abolishment, it still has a very long history of being phased out, and up till very recently, with more information being presented about it, did in fact highlight that there's still forms of serfdom that otherwise would. But the reason I bring them up is because they're a country that still goes to the Olympics. So let's say we have a very young woman who feels comfortable identifying as a female. They dominate their sporting events, they dominate all of their categories, and they're very excited to represent their country and their culture, and they want to participate. They come back and they do testing, and she's been denied, and this is infuriating to her. She's worked her whole life for this. She demands to know why. She goes through, and her coach comes back and says, well, you're not a woman. She says, well, what do you mean? It's like, well, nope, you're intersex. So then it becomes an issue of, well, what do you mean I'm intersex? It's like, you're a boy and a girl. Well, then, if word comes out about that, the media or anybody that has any sort of prejudice against her can just drum up some scenario where it's, oh, well, yeah, the only reason we lost is because they're not really a woman. You know, they're basically a dude. What a freak. And then what do you think is going to happen to that athlete? They're going to return home disgraced. They're going to go home in fear of being socially lampooned, potentially physically beaten to death, or thrown and facing jail time because they could just drum up any possible scenarios, and then without adequate representation or any way to sway them against it, the social backlash could be life-threatening. And this isn't just to dig on one country. This is any country that does not place any sort of rights to the homosexual or to the transgender or to anybody that isn't atypical from heteronormative policy. It's seen as morally repugnant to happen to have some series of characteristics that is not being shielded from public eye in the sense of morality. It's just to be said that that's where they're at with it. And let's even take this a step further back and not play like devil's advocate and be like, oh, well, what about the people who just don't know? And then they could be caught. And then they get this thing saying that, oh, it was undetected and they didn't know, but unfortunately due to their circumstances and their biology, or maybe they spin it some way by saying that she's such a strong athlete that her body overproduces and it's unfair given her genetics and that she's an anomaly and we can't allow that. Maybe they will provide some way to safely allow them to return back to their home, even though they're saying that the girl that you have is not actually a girl in our eyes, so they can't compete in the girls' events. Maybe they find some way to pad that out and just say that, oh, due to a medical condition, you can't come. I'm very sorry. Well, then not only have they wasted their own life trying to aspire to one of the greatest athletic pinnacles in all of human history, let's take this a step back and say that people who were assigned the wrong sex at birth and further beyond that, their gender identities do not align. Let's say that even before they had gone through the secondary sexing window of hormones or sensitivity, where they're more likely to have pronounced effects from their sex hormones during the time of maturation. Now, if you don't know, there's different periods of time where the body is highly susceptible to to sex hormones, and as a result, the proliferation of characteristics that are otherwise shown to allow for distinguishable or passing traits as a result of it is due to these periods of time. You can think of it like the time during puberty when boys and girls have drastic changes in their physique and their general disposition, and they start to go through teenagedom into young adulthood. During those periods of times, let's say that someone just caught this even before that, and then as a result they did not get a consistently higher exposure to androgens as a sign at birth male category. And although they did have some influx of androgens through the interstitial testicular testosterone production that had sort of transiently accumulated, and the interstitial testicular testosterone production that had undergone in very, be it normatively, much lower amounts than when there is a consistent stream of it via puberty and through the circulation of higher pulsatile secretion of testosterone and peripheral androgens. Let's say that there was something like, I don't particularly know what they use for hormonal blockers specifically for anybody who's under the age of 18, but one thing that I do remember hearing quite frequently about for the athletes that I'm familiar with needing to do like a one-stop shop PCT, Kispeptin 10 was one that was popular. I also know that it's not liraglutide. Is it Lyra? It's, oh my gosh, this is actually going to kill me because now that I've been talking about all these other stupid things for so long, I can't remember it. It is a GnRH suppressant that it's not Kispeptin 10. It's another one that it's like a single, let me pull it up right here just so I can go to this guy. But essentially what it does is it is one of the very few things that you can do as, well, it was supposed to be like a one-stop shop of your ability to entirely blunt your body. Let me go through my peptides. It's just like my little peptides little cheat sheet that I have throughout the decades and sort of gotten. TB500, PT1, Triptorelin is a GnRH agonist. So with something like maybe triptorelin, where you have a large suppression of the androgens that would otherwise be facilitating that. Let's say that they do something like triptorelin, where they stop the pulsatile secretion of these hormones and then going through puberty blockers, and then as a result of that, they go through the whole 9 yards of making sure that they only have their adrenal androgens producing in periphery because they don't have the testicular function or the ovarian hillock cells that would otherwise also give some transient amount of increase in those as well. Let's say that maybe they are getting like a Depo-Provera or some form of like fourth generation hormonal birth control as a way to do something, or like estradiol valerate, or maybe anything that would otherwise indicate an exogenous estrogenic or progestogenic based compound, to have them have those sensitive effects during those periods of time and windows. Let's say that we instead have those. If we're able to forego the influx of testosterone early enough, and also do that, and you're also able to severely impact the potential that it has then what would be largely the concern with it? Would it be the fine motor neural connection? Would it be the fine recruitment of muscle contractile tissue and its sensitivity due to result of the sensitivity that had been gone even before reaching like the age of 9 or 10 or like 13 or something? The periods of sensitivity certainly do have a wide variance, and I could see that they would try to stop even any amount of guesswork to it with something like this. But then even too, imagine the sheer amount of hard work, dedication, and otherwise all the efforts that somebody would otherwise not be allowed to take part in, even if they catch it as soon as they realize that this is who they are and what they want to be. Imagine that you've trained for 10 full years and you have entirely changed yourself to be in line and to be representing yourself as you are, and then subsequently being told that no, that's not good enough, you'll never be a real woman in our eyes. Imagine the disparaging effect that would have on somebody's general psyche. But that's not an issue for the IOC because they just don't care about their athletes. And of course, the argument then is going to be, well, no, we do care about our athletes. That's why we're imposing this ban. This is because of our position that we need to ensure fairness to all athletes. It's not necessarily the case that that's ensuring fairness to all athletes. How do you ensure fairness to all athletes? You can't. And I'm very shocked to see that the Olympics is somehow unaware of the lack of fairness. I could not imagine that a place that has a financial incentive and a nationalist incentive would otherwise be aloof to the fact that there are going to be a myriad of people who are otherwise going to find ways to ink out and cheat the system in innumerable ways to bring glory to their country and financial prosperity to their country via their winning athletes representing them. It's no surprise that there has been a long-standing series of cheaters and people who have had a duplicitous way of acting in order to, one, arrive at the Olympics, and two, to win accolades at the Olympics. There has been no shortage of absolutely outstanding efforts being propagated and otherwise distributed to these athletes in ludicrous and almost genius ways of inventing circumvention to the system to allow for them to cheat and for them to be doing this to ensure fairness, as opposed to having more rigorous, more randomized, controlled testing environments, to otherwise have better scrutiny of athletes, to have better X and Y and Z protocols in place before implementing this, just seems hysterical. I mean, I'm not going to get conspiratorial. I'm just going to say, unless some countries are really just trying to push like an old, historically irrelevant agenda to otherwise try to bring back old times, it makes no sense to me for the Olympics to be doing this. They would have to be receiving a considerable amount of funding from countries that would otherwise hate human rights and want to have an egregious violation of them, and to have such a large homophobic, generally just homophobic agenda or regime. It to me seems almost nonsensical. Now, why is it nonsensical to not allow androgen-dominated individuals into the Olympics? That seems like it's like the most sensical thing you could do for the athletes. Well, it's because there's no verifiably good way to otherwise do this, with the concerns being raised on, well, why don't we just have like a transgender Olympics? That does not suffice for the earlier issues that has been put out with the complications of theoretical Mauritanian athlete, right? If we are to say that, well, you can't compete in the male or female, but we'll have an intersex category, categorically speaking, that still does not suffice. Why? Because of the present issues that you're facing here within the female/women's category. If it was such that you have people who are more androgen dominant and not able to have that sensitivity window and have transitioned later in life, then if you have somebody who is otherwise within this category, who is more highly sensitized to androgens and has competed in that sport for this period of time, then you could face the same issues and just putting them into the IS category. So there's no real fairness that can be espoused. It's the issue of androgen dominance in sports, and by trying to ensure fairness, it's just something that can never be done. So it doesn't make much sense to me. And also for someone to put out, maybe we should have like a testosterone limit. Well, having a testosterone limit also does not provide for an adequate shield for these things as well. Why is that? Well, because you could find any series of ways in which you could otherwise circumvent that through blood work, through X and Y and Z. Let's say, for example, you have someone that is using a non-esterified testosterone and injecting that and having it pass through. Maybe you're doing a sublingual version of a highly potent androgenic synthetic androgen, and let's say that is in and out of your system quite quickly. Let's say that you allow for this individual to understand that within a few years' time they are going to be doing X and Y and Z. Therefore, you have them on a high training, high intensity, high X and Y and Z protocol. Then when it comes time to make sure that they are ready to compete, that you put them through a rigorous series of medications, and you find the clearance life, the half-life, the molecular weight of the agents that would otherwise not allow for them to be deployed and detected. So instead of having the differences in molecular weight of some steroids and or peptides, which is something that not a lot of people are very aware of, it's that there are chemical differences even between potentially bioidentical variants of these drugs, which would otherwise be relatively difficult to escape away from. But for allowing adequate clearance of all of these things, and to otherwise put parameters at a heightened end of normal and also show normative blood work, can very easily be done or masked or otherwise shown and not necessarily doctored to allow for that. But it's still not escaping the fact that there is periods of time in which high androgen dominance could otherwise facilitate for a large, substantial, truly outrageous increase in athletic performance leading up to the event, and then pushing past plateaus. And then once receiving those benefits, even if on the periphery it trails off, it would still likely be of such a degree that it could surpass or be almost an insurmountable hill for other athletes who have not doped and gotten that far. So there's a large series of complications and concerns that do arise from that. It's not just from the ineffectiveness of banning transgender intersex athletes in the female category. It's also just ensuring female category fairness all across the board, which is almost entirely inescapable when you have any sort of sporting that will allow for a highly probable rate of failure for athletes who are not exposed to a high amount of synthetic androgens. And even above just the prevalence of things like elevated synthetic androgen sensitivity, there are also innumerable things that they can otherwise modulate to just allow for their own endogenous production to otherwise be consistently the same, but also allow for athletic benefits. You can do a large introspection on some of the best anti-inflammatory peptides, the recovery peptides. You could otherwise look for beta-2 adrenergic receptor agonists. You could otherwise find innumerable other series of vectors that would otherwise allow for better oxygenation. There's so many different things that you can do even outside of just the base issue of androgen dominance in the sport that would otherwise ensure non-fairness, in which to some degree we can even look at things like WADA, the World Anti-Doping Association, and they have a fairly decently sized list of substances that are otherwise not approved for use as a doping agent. But even then, there are so many new designer research chemicals, designer steroids, and other products which work via different metabolic factors or different metabolites to exact similar effects, which would otherwise still indicate the potential for somebody to have an elevated performance outcome. So it's so bizarre to me that this is a hyperfixation for them to address, when otherwise we could just continue on with the sport as we know it, and try to ensure fairness for athletes by making sure that they are not doping. Maybe you could make it such that if you are an individual, you have to cause for a cessation of your hormones within X and Y, Z period of time. Now, of course, there would still be the contention of not allowing for gender affirming medication or care as a result of that, which would still lead to a potential caustic concern. Maybe it would be such that if someone was to be prescribed that and then they were an athlete, it would be disclosed to them that this would be a necessary step, and the halting and the progression of that would have to be something that they would reach themselves for it as a matter of fact consequence. I don't imagine that would bode over very fairly or well, so I think that would also be out of the equation. Of course, though, there is still quite a bit on the things that you can't do. I would imagine that there's probably stricter regulations on like even the medications that you are allowed to have during the time of the Olympics. I actually don't know about medical exams. I can maybe reach out to Monica and ask about some of the experiences that they've had, and if she's willing to share any information, maybe we could get some information. So I will tag her, and I will try to see if I can reach a DM and get some more insight from someone who's actually been there. If not, that's totally a-okay. There are a few other people I do know that have played in very high-level athletics and have undergone drug testing protocols. Clearly not at an international level like the Olympics, but some state and national tournaments, and maybe I can get some insight there on what they do for medications like that. Never had an individual who was prescribed testosterone or any birth control or otherwise. Well, actually, I don't even think they would care about birth control or estrogenic-based compounds. It does facilitate some. Well, you see, then there too is a concern as well, because then do they rate limit? But I have so many questions about the Olympics. So yeah, I don't know. I actually just do not know about that. But it'd be something I'd be very interested in, because yeah, I don't think they ping girls for using birth control. But yeah, it's a variant of a 19-nor based testosterone as a progestin. So maybe the periphery of that in its potentiation for X and Y and Z is just negligible enough where they don't consider it, or maybe they just haven't thought of that vector. Maybe they're going to ban birth control for Olympic athletes during a period of time for which the oral or the pellet formation must be given cessation during some time, and then maybe we'll have an even bigger issue with women's reproductive health and rights and advocacy if they ban birth control. So who knows what the Olympics is going to do next. It just does not feel like to me that this is an organization that places value on human life based on what I am interpreting this as. This is my opinion, and this is also just not a good look, in my opinion, for the IOC. So let's continue on, see if there's anything I want to blab about before I give you guys the outro. Yeah, IOC must not turn its back on women and girls of color. Thank you so much. I gave so much time and effort to building the 2021 framework, and I repeatedly share my views. I hope the IOC will not ignore us. As a black African woman, I ask the IOC to ensure international sports upholds athletes' human rights and does not promote institutionalized discrimination. Yes, thank you. Olympic silver medalist from middle distance running. As an Olympian who competed against Caster Semenya in 2009, I know firsthand the inclusion does not come at the expense of fairness. It would be devastating to see the IOC reject fair and evidence-based policy making in favor of irresponsible and politically expedient position. Yes, while ignoring the actual needs of women and girls in sports. Correct. The Olympic movement deserves better than that. Absolutely true. The IOC discontinued universal sex testing for being scientifically and ethically unjustifiable. Yeah, it's ethically unjustifiable for all of the things we've had. Even more so in 1996, when you could just beat the ever-loving shit out of someone for being homosexual or dressing a little different or presenting as any bit queer. It's even more so egregious with the rise of that being nearly, actually, not even nearly, it's 3 decades later, and now we're dealing with this again. UN bodies and leading medical organizations have long condemned sex testing and medically unnecessary interventions as discriminatory, very true, unethical, true, and harmful. Yeah, for all the things that we mentioned earlier. Requiring women and girls to undergo mandatory genetic screening just to participate in a sport, which would revive a practice test, even if it's a one-time test, violates women and girls' privacy, true, exposing them to extreme public scrutiny, true, humiliation, true, and it was a pathway to medically unnecessary interventions. Yeah, that's right, because then again, what if you have this athlete who's otherwise lived their entire, we'll go back to the theoretical Mauritanian athlete. Let's say that they go through, they realize that they have undescended testes and they have pseudotesticular components, and then they want to go back home. They have a non-medically necessary surgery because they've lived it their whole life, and it is not a necessity currently. It is not showing any potentially life-threatening risks. Let's say that they do undergo that surgery. There's some complication. They can no longer run, or they die because of it. They were living their life perfectly fine, perfectly well, perfectly healthy, and then they die, or they have some lifelong complication for an erroneous surgery to be presented because you guys did genetic-based testing, and otherwise everything else that would otherwise indicate it is perfectly fine on paper has left to some ridiculous outcome. It's just baffling. And by the way, this is just like right off the riff. I've not sat down and thought very critically about this, but there's innumerable things to be at fault with this entire program. The IOC, I think, is going to be one of those organizations that we look back on and find that they kind of sway their opinions back and forth a little bit too much based on where they can. I'm going to not continue on that path. Again, I don't want to be slanderous, but it's certainly very interesting to see why they are making their decisions. Banning transgender and intersex athletes from women's category in the name of fairness ignores that they are the most stigmatized in sport, true. Facing extreme barriers, very true. Harassment, very true. And abuse, that's not even a question. There's no evidence this policy will improve fairness or equality, exactly for all of the aforementioned reasons that I listed out there as well. It shifts focus from the real issues of women's sports like funding, very true, pay gaps, disparities, and gender-based violence. Yeah, all of those things are incredibly important, and by taking women out of women's sports, like what they're trying to do with this ban on transgenderism and intersex athletes, is just fucking ludicrous. We urge the IOC to prioritize safety over politics and not allow policy that actively puts all women at risk. Yes, it puts all women at risk for the innumerable series of reasons that I listed earlier. This is not something you're going to do to ensure the safety and fairness of all of your athletes. Invasive policing of women's bodies should be a concern for everybody as it reinforces harmful stereotypes and exposes all women LGBTI athletes to further harassment and scrutiny. Yes, for everything that I mentioned earlier. The new policy represents a complete reversal of the IOC's 2021 framework on fairness, inclusion, and non-discrimination. Sounds like someone's anti-DEI, much like the United States. A widely respected document informed by research and engagement with athletes and experts. Sounds wonderful. A sex testing and blanket ban policy would be a catastrophic erosion of women's rights and safety. Absolutely true. Andrea Florence, who is the executive director of Sports and Rights Alliance, this is by far one of the most ridiculous things I think that I've ever seen, bar absolutely nothing in the name of sporting. Gender policing and exclusion harms all women and girls and undermines the very dignity and fairness the IOC claims to uphold. They're not really substantiating their claims. They are, in fact, making it much more substantially worse for every single athlete involved. Our concerns are compounded by the fact that the IOC also seemed to be, at the time, divesting from the safe sport infrastructure and actually provides protection for women and girls. Yeah, they don't really care about that, do they? They really don't care to see that they want to present any fairness or inclusivity to any of their female athletes. It would almost feel like for anybody who is affected by this that they are hated by the IOC, and I would not fault them for saying that the IOC hates women. That would certainly be your right to have that opinion. The Sport and Right Alliance, the ILGA World Human of Sports, and over 100 organizations calling the IOC to immediately reverse these plans to sex test and ban women on the basis of their chromosome status. Yeah, they should. To fulfill its commitment in the Olympic Charter to ensure that every individual has access to the practice of sport without discrimination of any kind in respect to internationally recognized human rights, does not seem like they really care about that, do they, for the aforementioned reasons we talked about before. So there's really no legitimately beneficial outcome for any of the athletes. They can't necessarily ensure the highest level of fairness in their sporting due to the series of complications and concerns that come from the potential for doping, the incentive for doping, the incentive based off of not just financial and economic prosperity, but also nationalist propaganda that could otherwise be purported by countries that espouse that they have the best athletes in X and Y and Z, and their national pride that could otherwise lead to them having some very strongly vested interests in being one of the few that receive those medals, and by achieving those by any means possible. There's certainly incentive for countries who don't have any to finally have one, and for that athlete to be in the history books in the name for their country. There's certainly innumerable ways in which people would otherwise try to usurp the fairness of that, and that's just a theoretical possibility that is enacted by this, and by the extension of them banning the individual on the basis of genetic testing. I'm sure that there would be a considerable series of contentions if they do, in fact, list out how they plan on doing that testing and how they attempt to get this to be as accurate as possible with no false positives. And also, just imagine the fallout if you are otherwise an individual who's affected by this due to a false positive or a misread or an independent interpretation of this being wrongly interpreted. Imagine how much that would destroy your identity and destroy your life. Like, we saw like a female athlete get called a man for winning with such an astounding degree that even though they are just participating in female sports, everyone had just this sort of need to attack them and to just dehumanize them and also consider them to be like some freakazoid, when it's just, no, they have muscular features. And that's just another thing that's absolutely asinine to me. It's that women, if they're thin, they're too sickly, they need to eat a hamburger. Women, they're too fat, oh, they're gross, you're pudgy, you're disgusting, you're a land whale. It's that, oh, you're too muscular, oh, you look apish, oh, you look like a dude. There's no winning for women in any scenario, and this is just throwing that on top of it. There's nothing more absolutely concerning than the fact that they just get caught out at every end for every single indispensable reason that someone can just throw at them to cause some controversy. And it's just, at this point, you just have to imagine that countries and companies and all these places will just throw in these controversies to enact some form of generative noise or distraction, or to get some publicity as a result of its actions. And then maybe when they change things, it's, oh, we heard, we listened, you're right, that was wrong, we're gonna side with the right part of history, we shouldn't have even done that, we're so sorry, we are gonna be more inclusive, and let's bring in all these people next year. And it's like, this could only be some half-baked attempt to try to generate like some odd level of interest in it, but I just can't imagine that this bodes well for anybody involved, and it's genuinely unfortunate. Again, if I can get any more information on the things that they do, I will maybe do a follow-up. But yeah, very disappointed in the International Olympic Committee for their reprehensible behavior and for their lack of treating women fairly. In the wise words of Kendra Roy, fuck the patriarchy. But yeah, this is disgusting. The IOC should be very ashamed. What are they going to do? Probably nothing until there's significant pressure from more countries that believe in human rights to allow for these things to happen and hold their feet to the fire. What a shame.